want to talk about our opponent. They're bigger, faster, stronger, more experienced, and on paper, they're just better, and they know it too. But I want to tell you something that they don't know. They don't know your heart.
Patchwork Heart Ministry presents Young Catholics Respond, a challenge for young people to stand up for the Catholic faith and confound the world with radical hope. Now, here's your host, Bill Snyder.
And hello, everybody, and welcome into Young Catholics Respond video version. Hello and welcome to the program. As Adam said, my name is Bill Snyder, and today, as you can see, I am joined by Tony Kolenc. I want to just tell you a little bit about him before we begin our conversation about his latest book, The Merchant's Curse, which is part of the Hardwood series. You see that on your screen, but let me just tell you a little bit about him. He writes the historical teen fiction series, The Hardwood Mysteries, which has won more than 10 book awards. He is an author of fiction and nonfiction books and articles, a columnist for Practical Homeschooling magazine, and the host of the Shepherd's Pie radio show and podcast. He has retired as a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force, Judge Advocates General Corps, after 21 years of military service. He currently teaches at Ave Maria School of Law, and he speaks at writing, legal, and homeschool events. Tony and his family live in Florida. Welcome, Tony, to the program, and thank you so much for being here on Young Catholics Respond.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. I'm thrilled to be back with you.
Absolutely. And so tell me, Tony, about the latest book. And, you know, we've I know talked about this series before, but give people a little flavor of the series and talk about the latest book.
Yes, so the Hardwood Mysteries is an ongoing series from Loyola Press, takes place in 12th century England, and my main audience is, teenagers, middle school, high school, some college even, but the story follows a series of characters, but Zan is my 12th century peasant who in the first book winds up getting orphaned at a Benedictine abbey in Yorkshire, England, like I said, in the 12th century. And so he's kind of being raised by the monks, and that's where he meets Lucy, who is one of the main female characters. And they wind up solving these kind of spooky mysteries as they're going through they're growing up. The series starts with Zan and Lucy when they're 11. And right now there's 4 books. The 5th book's coming out this year. And they're going to be 15, 16 here soon enough. I'm writing book 6 over the summer. So it's an ongoing series. Each book sort of has a mystery that the characters have to solve. There's some sort of a historical event going on in the background because it's an exciting time in history. And there's religious themes kind of throughout the series. The most prevalent one being the theme of vocation and, what does God want me to do with my life? So that's sort of the thumbnail idea of the series. And then we could talk about, the different books and the latest release if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to talk about that. You mentioned some of the themes, and it's certainly one that goes through the entire series of vocation, which I think is so important for young people to really begin to understand, especially as, teens and preteens, to delve into that. And so is there a development that you take people on through that as they're searching and solving these mysteries?
Yeah, so each book kind of has its own theme. And so probably the easiest way to do it is just to show you real quick what I'm talking about. Shadow in the Dark, which is the first book, the theme there, you can see this kind of Grim Reaper, spooky character that roams around the Abbey grounds. That's kind of the sort of spooky mystery that they have to solve. But really, book 1 is about suffering and kind of why do bad things happen to good people kind of a situation. And so Zan and Lucy are in that. Book 2 is the Haunted Cathedral. Again, you kind of get the spooky vibe is, they travel to Lincoln Cathedral, and we learn a lot about Lincoln and the amazing history of this real life cathedral. And Zan and Lucy, are trying to solve this mystery of, is there, a ghost in the cathedral? But book 2 is really about forgiveness and hatred, holding on to your hatred versus forgiving, because Zan actually encounters the bandit who was responsible for making him an orphan, and he has to deal with forgiveness and that kind of thing. Book 3, The Fire of Eden, You could see this kind of spooky looking, well, he's more like Gandalf looking than spooky, but he's a magician who's a prime suspect in a jewel thief. So book three is a jewel thief, kind of whodunit. But again, the theme in book three is pride. Zan and Lucy are trying to solve this mystery of the who stole this jewel. And Zan is sort of struggling with pride issues that he's going through. And then book four, The Merchant's Curse, is the first one that doesn't have Lucy in it directly. We met another character in book two named Christina, and so she's my main female character. Book four takes place in Lincoln again, just like book two did, and we learn about history and King Henry II and all that. But there's this kind of spooky witchy woman who seems to curse people, and Zan's trying to figure out with Christina, just what is going on with that. And book four's theme is about vanity. I actually based book four's kind of whole vibe around the book of Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament, which is one of my favorite Old Testament books. And so book four is just permeated with Ecclesiastes, really.
That's beautiful, and a time for this and a time for that. That's the most famous one we know
And the vanity
Ecclesiastes.
of vanities,
Uh-huh.
everything is vanity, says King Solomon at the beginning. And really he goes on throughout the whole book of Ecclesiastes and shows us how all the things that people like to cling to in this life are ultimately vain, and they don't really satisfy. Whereas what's going to satisfy is doing God's will and the afterlife. And so kind of book four kind of uses that as its theme. All the characters and others are pursuing different vanities of this life, and they're kind of learning how those are not going to come through in the hard times when the witchy woman comes to call, if you will.
That's a powerful lesson for teens to, really explore in their lives, right? And so I would love it, maybe even just talking about the necessity of writing really good, stuff with religious themes in it for teens. I mean, this is a really important thing to be doing, and this series has won a lot of awards as well. We can talk a little bit about that, but tell me just about the importance of writing good, solid, and fictional, historical fiction books that teens can engage and learn virtue from.
Yeah, there is so much of a need for that today, and I'm so proud to be part of a group of Catholic authors who all write in different publishers and different genres, but they're all writing for teen audiences. You've probably talked to some of my colleagues at CatholicTeenBooks.com, which is a great place for families to go and look for books for their teens. And my books are on there, but so are 15 other authors. But all of us know how important it is to write for teens these days. I mean, there's a lot of strong mainstream writers out there, obviously, really great writers. But a lot of what they're serving up for our kids these days is more and more not the kind of things that really are going to benefit our kids in the long term in life. And so I really wanted to kind of reach, our teens where they're at with kind of these spooky, suspenseful mysteries that take place in historical settings, but are still quite engaging as, just compelling, suspenseful stories. And then, sort of organically, as that's going on, because of the setting, being in the Middle Ages, around a lot of religious individuals at a monastery and this type of thing, you can kind of bring in these other themes. Because back in the Middle Ages, especially if you're hanging around a bunch of monks and nuns at an abbey, that's they're living their whole lives around, living the gospel and encountering life through a faith view. So it doesn't take much effort to sort of find a religious theme when that's sort of your environment all around. And so I like to tackle different issues. Like, they sound spooky and like occultish, but they're not. But I'm tackling things like, are there ghosts versus saints, and are there witches and curses, and these types of things, wizardry and magic. But I'm approaching it all from a kind of a Christian worldview, but in a way that I think a teenager would feel like, hey, it's like reading a Harry Potter book kind of here is what I was going for. So that they would be engaged and want to read the books. Like, if you give a teen a million books and they don't read any of them, it's not going to help them very much.
No, that's a great point. And, keeping them engaged and, writing in the way that you do is so important, to keep them engaged and to keep them on their toes, to go through the book and learn more about their faith in an incognito kind of way, right? And, as you said, you're tackling these amazing topics. You're tackling these topics of, like, is there sorcery, and what's the deal with magic, and how do we approach it from a faithful perspective as a Catholic versus what is being fed out there. So that's awesome, and clearly it's done well because you've won some awards with the books. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and some of the awards you've won, and how that came to be for you and all of that.
Well, I mean, I feel so blessed. Loyola Press, who has just taken the series and run with it so well. You could see the artwork. I mean, the artwork alone, Book Four's artwork actually won a medal at the Independent Press Awards for this book cover here. It's just an indicator of how much Loyola Press has put into the series. The editing, the maps. There's actually maps in the interiors of all the books where really feels like almost like a fantasy book, but it's not. It's historical fiction. But Loyola Press, I really owe them so much credit for making a high quality product with me. And the series has won, like you said, over 10 awards. Book one, really, I think it took 6 awards. Books 2 and 3 each took gold medals. And book 4, at this point, it's still in the cycle, but it's already got 4 awards. And so I am so thrilled. Like I always used to, for my first book, as an author, you're a new author, and it's like, gosh, if I could only just win one award so somebody will tell me that my writing's good, and then I just got this shower of blessings that I was just like, okay, this is great. But all that really means to me is that, the book, tried to focus on the quality of the writing, the quality of the art and the maps, and the editing, and the quality of Loyola. So I think that's important, though, because if you're going to put a book in a kid's hand, you want them, for it to be a great story, and so we can talk more on that. But I really, I wanted the stories to be good stories first and foremost, before any historical or religious or other considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly, I mean, when you win awards like that, it's clearly the case, right? I mean, that's wonderful. I wonder, I mean, what kind of feedback are you getting from parents and teens? Have you received any feedback from parents and teens about this? And where would you encourage teens to obviously start with the first book if they haven't read any? But what is the feedback, and just from the parental perspective, and also from the teens' perspective, if you have it?
Sure, absolutely. Well, parents wind up loving the books. Sometimes it's kind of funny if you're at like a book signing or at a conference or something, and then the parents, see a cover like this, and they're like, I don't know if that's a book I want to get for my kids or whatever. And the kids that were like, what's this? I want to see this book. But then, a lot of parents will read the books, and I do get feedback. And then the parents become like my biggest cheerleaders for the books, because then they realize what's going on with the series, and any potential suspicion from the cover gets sort of dispelled. But to me, the biggest compliment is when, I hear like, oh, yeah, my teen, how often have you read my book? I'll run into some people coming back for another of the books. And they were like, I don't know, 12, 20 times, like what? It's like, what? You're reading the book that many times? And that's when you realize that our kids, no matter what it is, whether it's my books or somebody else's or what they're watching on YouTube, they're repeating this like over and over again. So whatever messages we're giving them, they're feeding themselves it repeatedly. And that, when I heard that kind of feedback, that the kids would read it multiple times, is when I'm like, gosh, I'm so glad that they're reading this, and not something else. So yeah, that's definitely some of the feedback I've got on that.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, again, that's really good, and it's good that kids are drawn in by the cover, and parents are like, "Hey, wait a minute, what is this? And tell me about this," because I think you're exactly hitting the target you want, which is amazing with the whole series. And so, I would love to know too a little bit about, because you have such a unique journey, being a veteran and all of these different things. How does that play into the overarching storyline as well? Like, have you been weaving through some of your personal experiences into these books?
You know, I think it's inevitable. Every author, every character in their books is somehow a reflection of themselves and their experiences. And they talk about write what you know. For me, as I keep writing the books, I realized one thing is, I lost my father when I was 12 years old. He had a heart attack. He was only 57. So I was in seventh grade, and then I was being raised by my mom with my siblings. And I think that loss really had an impact on me because I tend to deal with loss a lot in this series, and I think that's also part of the focus of sort of like, hey, why do bad things happen in our lives, and what are we supposed to do when those happen? How can we keep faith when things are falling apart or when our path in life seems, Zan is constantly struggling, especially in book four, and we'll see it even more in book five. He's always struggling because it always seems like his next step on his path is not clear to him, and he's not sure what to do, and he has all these choices he has to make, which is pretty much what happens to all of us in our lives. And for me, that's been my journey. Like you said, I started off in the military for 21 years, but that was a big journey. I was enlisted, then I was an intel officer, then I went to law school and became a lawyer, and then after I retired, I've been teaching now, and plus we were homeschoolers, and I write this homeschooling column. So I've got a lot of that kind of in my background where I've gone from one thing to the next. And so I think that's been part of my journey too. It's like, gosh, well, what's next for me? And, things that maybe I wanted to do that I wasn't able to do, or failures that I had with previous books I tried to write that I could never, finish or get to a publisher. So all those things I think inform just my human experience, and they kind of wind up, I think, in some of the, if not the exact plots, but at least sort of the disappointments in life that we all are confronted with.
And that's a great, again, great lessons for teens to learn. And I really like you mentioned, in this latest book that you really focused on Ecclesiastes, and that seems to fit in right with that, right with that message, right?
Yeah.
Here we are, and so that's amazing. And this series you mentioned is going to continue as well, and you've got, but it sounds like book 5 and book 6 already in the works.
Yeah, book five should be coming out hopefully in October of 2023 this year. That one, I can tell you it's not well known at this point, but I'll tell you and your audience, because you're my favorites, right? It's going to be called Murder at Penwood Manor, and it's going to be a murder mystery whodunit. And that one is kind of fun well, murder doesn't sound very fun, but I haven't really done a murder. Each book I'm trying to do something a little different. It's a ghost story, it's a jewel thief, it's a murder mystery now. And that one's kind of fun though, because I finally bring back Lucy and Christina, both who have sort of this sort of romance interest for Zan, my main character, and I'm able to bring them both into the story at the same time in this book. And so it's kind of fun because it's kind of like a little teenage, flirty love triangle going on, which makes it kind of an interesting dynamic. Once you get to know the characters and you realize Lucy is this very holy girl who's actually decides to go and become a nun. Christine is a much more worldly girl. But they're both really good people, but they both kind of approach the world very differently. And so it's interesting to kind of see how they interact with Zan. But yeah, so the book five comes out hopefully this year, and I still have to write book six. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the history, but I've
Yeah.
been leading up to the Third Crusade, which is
Oh.
about to take place. And so all of my books, I've been planting seeds and bringing us closer as we go, a year at a time, essentially, closer to what will become one of the Crusades people have heard about, because they hear about King Richard the Lionheart. Everybody seems to know King Richard the Lionheart
Yeah.
from like Robin Hood or something.
Yeah.
And he's involved in the Third Crusade.
Very cool. That's really cool. And talk a little about that historical. I mean, clearly you have a passion for historical fiction and historical writing in this historical time period, and it's neat that you're leading towards something like a crusade and all the things that come with that. I mean, you use that buzzword crusade in our world as Catholics, and boy, people's minds go in 12 different places. So, you can touch on many different themes in that. But talk a little bit about just moving the series and even why you chose this time period for this whole series.
Yeah, it's a great time in history. It's during the reign of King Henry II, which was one of the great kings of England that started a whole dynasty of kings in his family. It's after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket that we hear about. We have the Third Crusade that's getting ready to start with Saladin, the legendary Muslim sultan who's going to take Jerusalem back pretty much by the end of book four, actually, by the end of book five. Saladin has taken back Jerusalem. But yeah, so the history in this time is really important in our knowledge of the Middle Ages, that feudalism, monasticism. Those are themes that are all in social studies classes. In fact, I'm really excited. The books are being used in a lot of schools to sort of supplement history or religion curricula, where students are actually reading the books and learning about things. So, like for instance, in book one, the main world building is about monastic life and feudalism in the Middle Ages and how the manor system is kind of working in the background and this kind of thing. And it sort of sets the stage because although they're historical fiction, they're heavy on the fiction and lighter on the history. But that's kind of what book one does historically. Book two sort of introduces us to a major city and cathedral, Lincoln Cathedral, which is a major cathedral in England and had some really amazing history that kind of again illustrates sort of the power of the church in the Middle Ages and this kind of thing. Book three really highlights some of the dysfunction that's going on in the church at this time and some of the church versus state issues between King Henry and the Pope and appointing bishops and this kind of thing. That sort of shows us some of what was going on in history just between church and state. And then book four, really, the history focuses on King Henry II's family and all the dysfunction in his family, how his kids were rebelling against him and trying to ally themselves with the French to, become king themselves. And so there's a lot of that going on. And then, but in each of the books, though, I sort of am planting little seeds leading up to the Crusades. I'm talking about some of what's going on in the Holy Land. While these books are going on in the Holy Land, the Christians are bickering with each other. Saladin is getting all the Muslims organized. And then by the time we get to book five, we're going to see there's going to be a large kind of pre-crusade theme in that because we're going to meet a crusader as one of our main characters. And then book six, and if it will go on, I'm hoping I'll be able to continue writing for a few more books. We're going to get Zan and his friends actually out of England and into the Holy Land while the Third Crusade is going on. That's my goal, at least.
Wow, that's so fascinating, and I wonder, obviously, we're living in this time period, right? Like we're living here well past, all of this in the Middle Ages, and so obviously when you're writing in this theme with some fantasy themes, but in the historical fiction mode, how does one use the the themes from that time period in our time period? Are you able to see people pulling out the virtue and pulling out the all the vice and different things and relating it into this time period and being able to live but also enjoy the books but also live the virtue that you're putting in there?
Yeah, it's so easy to do because, as you know, human nature hasn't changed. You can go back and read the book of Genesis, Cain and Abel, and you're like, yep, pretty much we still got that going on here. And so because human nature hasn't really changed, even though these are medieval characters with sometimes, significantly different, world backgrounds than what we might have in America today, for sure. The reality is they're still dealing with, like, what am I going to do when I grow up? Am I going to get married? In fact, they had much more limited choices. Am I going to get married? I'm going to go to the church and become a nun or a monk or something. Am I going to go into business and become a merchant? I mean, honestly, these are some of the same things that our kids are always asking themselves. And then when you look at just some of the historical things going on, like the power of church and state and that struggle, it's going on all the time in the world and in America right now. This idea of the occult and being afraid of kind of spooky mystery things, witches, and this type of thing. The occult and all that is permeating our culture at this point. So there's so many parallels, and then there's just basic things: thievery, murder. I mean, these are things that we see, unfortunately, quite up in front in our world. And then all of the issues that go with that: forgiveness, hatred, humility, pride. We haven't changed as people. And so I think, and plus, although I write it to try to give us a glimpse into what it's like to live as a medieval person, I also am writing it knowing that my readers are teenagers today. And so in some ways, there probably is, definitely some intentional modern vibes to the characters also that I think our readers can identify with, especially with the female characters. Christina is much more, I don't want to call her a feminist, but she's much more of that ilk for that time than Lucy is. And so I can sort of sneak in even some of that kind of modern idea of feminism and some fun things, battle of the sexes kind of things. I mean, look, this stuff was going on throughout all of history. We just called it different things at different times.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you are able to do that, and more importantly, the reader is able to relate and bring that, but still have fun. I think that's the biggest thing. When you're writing fiction, is to have fun reading it, right? Even you mentioned that to have this before you get to all the other things that do that, because when you draw into the fun aspect of it and you drop in the virtue, you learn it more. So that's so cool. As we're wrapping up, Tony, I want to make sure people understand where they can find these books and how they can get in touch with you, and in what ways. I know you're also speaking and doing other things, so please tell people how they can bring you out and have them come to their parish or school.
I really appreciate that. I've been doing a bunch of school visits. I live in Florida, so I can get to a lot of the schools in Florida, but I'll do them on Zoom. I did one in California over Zoom. I'm doing one in Canada over Zoom next week, actually. And so it's really great to use these books with your middle schoolers, especially. I think is probably, if you're in a school environment, probably the best age group. They can go to my website, antonykolenc.com. That's ANTONYKOLENC.com. And you'll see on there's links to, of course, all my different writings, but also to scheduling me to come speak at your school. The other website I use, which is linked for mine, is thehardwoodmysteries.com. And from there's links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Loyola Press, Christian book. You can get the book just about anywhere. I always encourage people, go to your local Catholic bookstore and ask them to stock it and order it through them, because I do kind of believe we need to have an obligation to support our local mom and pop Catholic bookstores or independent bookstores. So I would encourage that. But yeah, please, I would love to come speak at your schools and your classes. We have a lot of fun with the kids. I've gotten some great feedback from teachers and kids on that. And so just remember, my tricky thing about my name is my first name is Antony. There's no H in that. So that's why I go by Tony. It makes it a lot easier.
Well, no, and what we'll do is we'll put a link down below in the description, so that all you have to do is click on that, folks, and you'll go right to his website. So that we don't.
Can I mention one other thing I forgot to say, which is, like you, I enjoy podcasting, and I've had you as a guest at least once before on my Shepherd's Pie podcast, and that is it's really geared for teachers or parents or youth leaders. It's more of an adult audience, but our focus is always on issues that impact youth. And you can find links to the Shepherd's Pie to listen to that if you want on my website also.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, definitely check out the podcast, folks. It's really good, and there's always a nice educational focus with your podcast. I can attest to that. To really give people a flavor of, hey, this is why it's so important to reach out to the youth and young adults growing up. And you're doing a great job of it just with this series and everything else that you're doing, Tony. I really appreciate your time and you coming on the program today to be with us and share on Young Catholics Respond.
Thank you, Bill. It's been a pleasure having you. I mean, being on your show. I want to have you back on my show. So I was just thinking.
Yeah, we'll do it for sure, for certain. Well, folks, I want to remind you before we wrap up that you can go over to patchworkheart.org to find out more information about all that we do here at Patchwork Heart Ministry, including our documentary on the Shroud of Turin, Who Do You Say I Am? Until next time, folks, from all of us here at Patchwork Heart Ministry, may God bless you and your families. Keep beating to those Catholic hearts.
Young Catholics Respond is a production of Patchwork Heart Ministry. For more information about this and all our media programs, visit patchworkheartradio.org. To learn how you can support our ministry or become a sponsor, visit patchworkheart.org.